Hello everybody, Andrew Blake from thedigitalaudio.manual.com. Today let's explore the list editor in Cubase. But before we start, I want to remind you that there's a link below to the Content Navigation Guide, which is an easy-to-navigate web page with links to all the content on this channel. And besides that, in the near future, I'm going to begin adding tips and other bits of information that will only be available there. If you're working with programs like Wavelab or Cubase Plugins or the Cable Guys Shaperbox and many other projects that are in the works, then I know you're going to find, just like I have, that this is an invaluable study aid. And the other thing I want to make sure you understand is that this is not a simple PDF. This is a constantly updated page that has any information that is new, or anytime videos are changed, really anything updated. And once you have it, you will always have the latest information constantly updated. So if you haven't gotten it already, go to the link below, click on it, and save it to your favorites. It's my gift to you. Okay, so let's get started. The list editor. This is something that allows you to take all your MIDI data and see it on a list, and then make various edits that are specific to seeing something like this and easier to deal with. Although looking at this picture, you may think, that's not so easy. Let's explore it. Get to the list editor, go up to your MIDI menu. Once you open up the list editor, whatever MIDI data is in your event now shows up as a long list. It shows all the note value, plays through each MIDI note in your event, and it has various menus over on the left, the functions that we can carry out. You can zoom in and out the typical ways you would for your keyboard. Grab the ruler, zoom in and out. All the same things you would normally do in the project view, you can do here in the list editor. Like all of these editors, sometimes you may see or not see various bits of information, depending on what you've selected. Over on the little setup option, if I click on the layout button, right now the status line is not in view, so I'm going to check that. But anything else that's not here, you can check it or uncheck it. Once everything is checked, you have a toolbar like usual. You have the status line. Then you have this filters option. You're going to see as we go through this if we can check things, and that's what we're going to see. Down in the event display, you have an event list over here, and then over here on the right, you have a thing called the value display. All right, so let's take a quick look at the toolbar. On the far left, you have the solo option. Right now, the project will play with my part. If I turn on the solo, then only the part that I'm looking at will play. If I want to actually record something in MIDI, I can hit the record button here. We have the retrospective recording. That means if your part is playing, and you actually are playing something along with it as a practice. Right now I'm just punching in some notes, but I forgot to hit record, or I didn't think about recording. With retrospective recording, everything is being recorded in the background. If I come back up and hit the retrospective button, everything I just played then gets inserted like I was recording it. Your auto scroll buttons, you're going to see these in every editor in Cubase. Basically, it always keeps the cursor on the screen. As the cursor moves, the screen will move. If you turn that off, cursor will move, but the screen will stay right where it's at. You also can enact the stationary cursor. That makes the screen move behind the cursor. When you click on your notes, if you don't hear them, you want to turn the acoustic feedback button on. That way, everything you play will get auditioned. You have your usual tools: select, draw, erase, trim tool. Trim tool allows you to just slice things exactly where they're at. If I click and drag over this note, then I can take off the end of it. If I slice it like that, and before I let go, I hold the Alt key, then it takes off the front of it. Your mute tool, your zoom tool. You have the independent track loop. Again, this shows up in all the editors. Right now I have a looping point. You can see by this purple line. But if I turn on the independent track loop, I can draw a different looping point that has nothing to do with that. You have the option to insert various types of events. You have a list here of note, controller, and other options. For example, if I go to the option that says note, in my tools I change to my draw tool. As I move my draw tool, a little cursor moves with it, showing where it's going to draw. Now there's actually a cursor right here that's playing in my project, but there's a separate cursor that moves with whatever tool I have. And as I move this along, it goes up to every little event that's here. Right now these are different notes. So if I stop right here where this note is, and I go below it with this draw tool and click on it, it's going to draw in more notes. And I can keep clicking on that and draw in other notes if I want. I can switch over to my erase tool, and I can erase those. One way this comes in handy, in this little example I have pitch bend data in here. But the only pitch bend I need is right here, this little piece. These other pieces are like kind of extraneous little pieces that may have gotten drawn in by mistake. Very easy to find these with this list editor. Click on them with the erase tool, and then remove things like that I don't need. We have the insert velocity. You can either set a velocity here with a number, spin your mouse wheel, or you have a drop down with some typical velocities. We have our nudge settings, link it to the grid or pick a resolution. When you're using the nudge, if you use the move left or move right, whatever you're selected is going to move up or down this list. If I hit move left, it moves up the list. Move right, it moves down the list. If I use any of these controllers on the left or the right, for example, if I use this one on the far right, it either increases the value on the right. I hit this a couple of times. If I decrease it on the right, same thing on the left. I either increase it or decrease it on the left. You have your snap to grid either on or off. The shortcut for this is always J unless you change it. You have the option for grid relative, events. We've gone into all this stuff when we looked at MIDI editing. If you want some more explanation on that, I would watch the videos on MIDI editing. Use the quantize or adapt to zoom. You have the quantize drop down, the apply quantize button, soft quantize, open the quantize panel. There's a whole video on the quantize panel if you're interested. The quantize event, show the part borders, edit all parts, edit the active part, what the part is, step input, MIDI input, how you want colors on your events. You can open up the VST instrument, buttons for the zone controls. Moving off of the toolbar, we come into the status line. And here's where we begin to get some good information from the list editor. First thing up we have is the mouse position. As you move your mouse pointer around, you get some very exact readings in this mouse position window. And another thing that's super useful, you actually get a current chord display. So as you can see on these notes, they're built-in chords. As the cursor moves over these chords, you actually get a reading up here that tells you what chord it is. You can move your cursor backwards and forwards by using your plus and minus key over in your number keys. For example, I'm hitting the minus key right now, and now I'm hitting the plus key. But as I move forward, I look at the chord display, it says E minor, telling me that this chord right here is a E minor. As I move my plus key a little bit further, and I come over this next set of notes, it's now telling me it's a G chord. This can come in very handy when you're looking at chords that you've put together, or when you have some chords from another song that you're trying to analyze. You can see everything in real time. If you have the independent track loop on, you get a display for that as well. Then we get the filters bar, and this has some very useful ways to sort the data. First up, you can hit any one of these checkboxes, and that will hide that particular kind of data. For example, most of this stuff is notes. If I hit the note checkbox, everything that's a note gets taken out, leaving only pitch bend or aftertouch or any other controller data that I've left. I can hit show all to bring everything back. In the very first drop down, we have a focus bar. We have these focus options. If I click on this, it says no focus, event types with data 1, and event channels. When it's on no focus, that means you're going to see everything. The next option says the event type, and right now it's grayed out. What this is telling you is that you first want to make a selection. For example, right here I have controller data. If I select this controller data, just one little piece of it, then I go to this focus bar and I say event types. The only thing that's going to remain visible is other controller data. Same thing if I want to take like pitch bend. I have an event of pitch bend here. If I select that, and then I go up to my event types, if there was any other pitch bend in this list, only the pitch bend would show up. The next option says event types and data. So it's exactly the same, except it lets you filter out by the first choice that you make. For example, if I go to this note in this chord and select it, when I look at my information, it says that this note is E1. If I go to my choices and say event types with data 1, it's only going to take other notes that are also E1. So when I put that filter on, every one of these notes is E1. And then the last option is if you actually have your MIDI data on different channels. The list editor makes heavy use of the logical editor. If we take this last option that says setup, it actually opens up the logical editor, which we can then take presets out of or create various logical editor things that we want to do. There's a whole series of videos on the Project Logical Editor if you're interested in those. So let's try to get a grip on what we actually see in this list editor. I'm going to take this MIDI event, select it, go to MIDI, open in the list editor, and what this shows is every MIDI note that's in that event. And it goes from the top, like a staircase, down to the bottom. And in this case, I can see the project cursor right here. And wherever the cursor is, by whatever note it gets next to, like in this case, these notes, if you look over on the actual list, a little arrow appears. So because this little arrow is here, I know it's talking about this note right here. And if I select this note, it actually selects this column of information, and vice versa. If I take this arrow and I select anywhere, then it selects that note or event or whatever is in this list. Whenever you click in this area, it puts the cursor right at the beginning of whatever that event is. A convenient way to audition these events, not only does it change it whenever I click in this column, but if I double click, then it starts playing the project. And if I double click again, it stops. And every time I double click it, it goes right back to the beginning of whatever it is I'm working on. Then you start getting these columns, tell you the information. First column tells you the type. In this case, they're all notes. But if there was controllers or pitch bend, it would show you all that. Then you have the start column. You can actually move events here. If I click on this column, then move my mouse over one of these numbers and click, it'll change it to whatever I move it to. It resorts the list because these notes will always move in the order that they're performed. The next column we have is the end. Unlike the start, if I move the end numbers, the event doesn't start moving to a different place. Instead, it actually changes how long it is. For example, if I start adjusting the end on this one, it'll actually make this event longer or shorter, depending on how I adjust the numbers. The length column has pretty much the exact same effect. The data 1 column pretty much just reflects whatever kind of data it is. For example, because this first one is a note data, in this case it says E2. If I click on this, start spinning the mouse, it'll actually change the pitch to a different pitch. Below that, I have a program change. That's going to change it to any program change number I want. Below it, I have a pitch bend. Again, that's going to spin or change to whatever pitch bend data I make. Then you have data 2 and data 3 columns. If you're dealing with notes, data 2 is note on velocity. Data 3 is note off velocity. You have a column if you want to change the MIDI channel. And then you have a comment column. Some of these events will allow you to put a comment in here. So again, in this event display, you're seeing all the events, or in this case, these MIDI notes, moving through like this little stair step. If I go back to the project, I have 4 bars here that are in a loop on this base MIDI line. And again, when I open it up in the list editor, I'm still seeing 4 bars up here in a loop. If I zoom in a little bit, each one of these notes are happening in this one bar here. So if I grab one or I move it around or I change the length of it, shows how it relates to this bar that it's in. But you just see everything the way it's being introduced in the project, one note after another, or one program change, or whatever the thing is you're looking at. The value display is pretty much set to specific things. There's only about 5 or 6 options here. But for example, when you're looking at notes, you go to this value display and you start drawing. You're changing the velocities of these notes. And you can quickly change the notes very fast by just clicking and dragging over them. If this was aftertouch, it would be similar. You could change the aftertouch very quickly. Or pitch bend, changes the value of the pitch bend very quickly. There's nothing that really tells you that this is velocity. There's no heading up here that tells you. But as you change these velocities, if you look over here in the data 2 column, you will see the numbers change over there as well. So it gives you some reflection of what you're actually changing. So the main editing you're going to do in the list editor, you're either going to insert various events or change those events. When it comes to inserting them, you're going to start by going up to this list that stands for the insert event type. You would pick whatever event is you want to insert. You have note, controller, program change, aftertouch, pitch bend, polypressure, system exclusive, SMF, and text. If I stay on the note option and then I switch to the draw tool, if I click, it's going to draw a note. If I click again, it's going to draw another note. I can click multiple times if I want it. It's going to draw the notes based on whatever the snap value is. If you want to have some control over that, turn the snap off. Then when you draw a note, you can change its length without any kind of restriction. And if you change it to any one of these other options, for example, if I switch it to controller and I start drawing, I will get a series of controllers. If I switch to the pitch bend and I start drawing, I will get a series of pitch bend events. We've talked about this filters bar, how you can click things to hide them. There's a nice shortcut built here. If you hold control when you click on a category like note here, everything else gets checked and hidden. And then if you hold control and click it again, everything gets cleared. A couple of other shortcuts when you're editing. If you select multiple events, like I'll select all these notes here, start changing one of them, they all change relative to each other. All your typical editing functions apply here. If I hold Alt on any event and then drag it, I create a copy of it. I can switch to my mute tool and I can mute several events at the same time. If I want to change the way things are colored, I can go to my event colors. I can choose to see them by velocity or the channel or any of the other things that are listed here. One of the things in the list editor you can do kind of extensively is work with what's called system exclusive messages. This was something I had to work with a lot at a time when I actually had a band that performed live on stage, and we actually had MIDI devices that would change the lights or our set list, and the sequencer I would use would load what's called these system exclusive messages to set up things like the set list. That time it was next to impossible to try to edit something like that. In Cubase, you can load in what's called the system exclusive, and then you have an area over here that says comment, and click on these messages, And then you can do some real extensive editing of the various bits of information that are in a system exclusive. You can insert them and delete them. These days I have no use for something like this necessarily, but it's here in Cubase if somebody still needs something like this. And that wraps up all the options for us in the list editor. As always, if you haven't already, be sure to grab your copy of the Digital Audio Manual Content Navigation Guide from the link below this video. It's your faster, better way to learn and review. Pick it up, look it over, all the different topics that are gathered there, and then you too can get started on your path to a better way to learn all this stuff. Today we took a tour of the list editor. We saw the layout, we looked at all the toolbar buttons, focus menu, the event list, the event display, the value display. We saw how to draw events. We learned how we can filter and edit those events. We ended up looking at system exclusive messages. And we will continue to move through all these various features and functions in Cubase. As always, it's great to have you guys here, and I'll see you on the next video.